At his peak in the late 1980s, Pablo Escobar was the seventh richest man on earth. He made $70 million per day. He owned planes, helicopters, ranches, mansions, and a private zoo with hippos and elephants. He bribed half of Colombia's government. He built entire neighborhoods for the poor who loved him. He was elected to Congress. He was on magazine covers. And he did all of this by flooding the United States with cocaine, tons of it. Enough that he single-handedly created America's crack epidemic. He killed thousands of people, judges, journalists, politicians, police officers, civilians. He blew up a commercial airliner to kill one man, bombed shopping centers, started a war with the Colombian government, and for years he won. The narco king who made an entire country kneel. If you're fascinated by the criminals who became more powerful than governments, subscribe to Our Disturbed Historian. We're exploring the kingpins who built empires on addiction and violence. Pablo Escobar was born in 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia. Poor family. His father was a farmer. His mother was a teacher. Nothing in his childhood suggested he'd become one of history's most notorious criminals, except his ambition. Even as a teenager, Pablo wanted to be rich, obsessively rich. He didn't care how. He started small, stealing tombstones from cemeteries, sanding off the names and reselling them, stealing cars, smuggling cigarettes, small-time criminal activity. But he was smart, calculating, and absolutely ruthless. By his early 20s, Pablo had moved into kidnapping. He and his crew would abduct wealthy Colombians and ransom them back to their families. This was more profitable than petty theft, but it was also dangerous. One botched kidnapping could get you killed by police or rival criminals. Pablo needed something bigger, something with less risk and more profit. And in the mid-1970s, he found it: cocaine. Cocaine had been around for decades, but in the 1970s, demand in the United States exploded. Americans wanted it. Wealthy professionals, celebrities, party culture. Cocaine became the drug of choice for people with money. And Colombia could grow coca plants, process them into cocaine, and smuggle it north. Pablo saw the opportunity. He didn't invent the cocaine trade, but he industrialized it, turned it from a small-scale operation into a massive, efficient business. Pablo started by buying coca paste from farmers. He'd process it into cocaine in jungle labs, then smuggle it into the United States through various routes. At first, he used human couriers, people who'd swallow bags of cocaine and fly to Miami, but this was inefficient. You could only move small amounts. Pablo wanted to move tons, so he bought planes, small aircraft that could fly low under radar, land on rural airstrips. He corrupted border officials, bribed police, built a network that could move massive quantities of cocaine with minimal risk. By the early 1980s, Pablo's Medellín Cartel was making billions, not millions, billions. The money came in so fast they couldn't count it. They weighed it instead. Pablo allegedly spent thousands of dollars per month just on rubber bands to wrap cash. They buried money, hid it in walls, lost track of it. Millions of dollars would rot in warehouses because they had so much they couldn't spend it fast enough. Pablo's problem wasn't making money. It was what to do with it. He bought property. Hacienda Nápoles, his main estate, was over 7,000 acres. It had a private airport, a bullring, lakes, and a zoo. Pablo imported hippos from Africa, elephants, giraffes, exotic birds. He built a car collection featuring vehicles that once belonged to famous gangsters. He wanted to be seen as a legend, as someone operating on a different level than ordinary criminals. And in Medellin, he built soccer fields, housing developments, gave money to the poor. People loved him, called him Robin Hood Paisa, the man who got rich but didn't forget where he came from. But Pablo's wealth came with a body count. He didn't tolerate betrayal, didn't tolerate competition. If you crossed him, you died. If you worked for the government and went after him, you died. If you were a journalist who wrote critically about him, you died. Pablo pioneered sicarios, teenage assassins on motorcycles. They'd pull up next to a target, shoot them, disappear into traffic. These kids grew up in poverty. Pablo gave them money and motorcycles, gave them status, and in exchange they killed without hesitation. The Colombian government tried to stop him. Police raided his labs, seized his shipments, arrested his men. Pablo's response was to escalate. He declared war, started a campaign of narco-terrorism, bombing government buildings, killing judges who wouldn't take bribes, assassinating police officers. Colombia descended into violence. Hundreds of people died. And Pablo kept making money, kept operating, because he'd corrupted so many officials that the government couldn't function against him. In 1982, Pablo was elected to Colombia's Congress, a drug lord, in the legislature. He used his position to try blocking an extradition treaty with the United States, because extradition was his nightmare. Colombian prisons he could escape or control. American prisons were different. If the US got him, he'd spend life in a supermax. So he fought extradition through politics, bribery, and violence. When Colombia's Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, pushed for extradition and spoke out against Pablo, Pablo had him assassinated, shot by sicarios on a motorcycle, in broad daylight, in Bogota. This was a turning point. Killing a sitting minister was too much. The Colombian government, under pressure from the US, cracked down hard. Pablo's properties were raided. His labs were destroyed. He went into hiding, and the Colombian government started extraditing cartel members to the United States. Pablo's greatest fear was becoming reality, so he escalated further. In 1985, he allegedly helped fund the M19 guerrilla group's attack on Colombia's Palace of Justice. The attack killed half of Colombia's Supreme Court justices. The stated goal was destroying extradition case files. The result was over 100 dead and the building burned. The violence continued through the late 1980s. Pablo bombed the DAS building, Colombia's equivalent of the FBI. Over 60 people died. He targeted politicians who supported extradition, killed 3 presidential candidates, bombed a newspaper headquarters, and in 1989, he ordered the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, a commercial airliner. The target was supposedly one passenger, a presidential candidate who didn't end up on the flight. But Pablo ordered it anyway. The plane exploded mid-air. All 107 people on board died, plus 3 on the ground when wreckage fell on homes. Pablo also bombed shopping centers and placed car bombs in crowded areas. His strategy was simple. Make life in Colombia so terrifying that the government would negotiate, and eventually they did. In 1991, Colombia's government offered Pablo a deal. If he surrendered, he wouldn't be extradited to the United States. He'd serve time in a Colombian prison, but it would be a prison he built. On land he chose, with guards he selected. La Catedral, the cathedral. It wasn't a prison. It was a luxury compound disguised as one. Pablo surrendered in June 1991. He served time at La Catedral, which meant he lived in comfort, had a soccer field, a bar, could have visitors whenever he wanted, continued running his cartel from inside. The government had essentially given him a safe house in exchange for him stopping the bombing campaign. It was humiliating for Colombia, but the violence had stopped. That's what mattered to a terrified population. But Pablo's imprisonment didn't last. In 1992, the government discovered he was still running his cartel and had allegedly murdered rivals inside La Catedral. They decided to transfer him to a real prison. Pablo found out. He walked out of La Catedral, just left. His guards let him. He went back into hiding. And the hunt began again. This time, the Colombian government was serious. They formed a special unit, received help from the US DEA and CIA, and vigilante groups emerged. Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. They went after his family, his associates, his properties, burned his houses, killed his lawyers, made his life hell. Pablo was on the run for 16 months, constantly moving, paranoid. His empire was collapsing. His money was running out. His allies were dying or betraying him. His family fled to Germany but were denied asylum. They were stuck. And Pablo was being hunted by Colombian special forces, American agents, and Los Pepes. All of them wanted him dead. They tracked him through phone calls. Pablo would call his family. The authorities would triangulate his location. Every call brought them closer. On December 2nd, 1993, Pablo made a call. The Colombian National Police located him in a middle-class neighborhood in Medellín. They surrounded the building. Pablo tried to escape across the rooftops. He was shot multiple times, fell dead on a rooftop. The man who'd been the seventh richest person on earth, who'd made $70 million per day, who'd declared war on a government and nearly won, dead at 44, shot like a common criminal on a roof. His death was celebrated. Photos of his corpse were published. Colombian police posed with the body. It was shown on television. The narco king was dead. The violence would finally end. Except it didn't, because Pablo hadn't been the only drug lord. The Cali cartel took over his roots. Other groups emerged. The cocaine trade continued. Pablo's death didn't end anything. It just changed who was in charge. Pablo's legacy is complicated in Colombia. Many people remember him as a monster, the man who killed thousands, who bombed planes and buildings, who terrorized an entire country. But in Medellín's poorest neighborhoods, some still see him as a hero. The man who built their houses, who funded their soccer fields, who gave them money when the government gave them nothing. There are Pablo Escobar tours, museums, his face on t-shirts. He's been mythologized, turned into a folk hero despite the mountains of corpses he left behind. His family suffered after his death. His wife and children lived under assumed names, changed countries multiple times. His son, Juan Pablo, changed his name to Sebastián Marroquín and has spent decades trying to distance himself from his father's legacy. He's apologized to victims' families, written books acknowledging his father's crimes, tried to be different. But the name Escobar will always carry weight. The hippos Pablo imported to his private zoo, they're still in Colombia. After his death, most of his exotic animals were relocated or died. But the hippos survived, escaped into Colombia's rivers, and they've been breeding. There are now over 100 hippos in Colombia, an invasive species that shouldn't exist there, causing ecological problems. They're called cocaine hippos, a living reminder of Pablo's excess. Animals that will outlive his memory, spreading across rivers, because one drug lord wanted a private zoo. Pablo's story is a warning about what happens when crime becomes so profitable that criminals can outgun governments. The cocaine trade made Pablo richer than most countries. He could afford to wage war against Colombia, could afford to bribe thousands of officials, could afford to build armies, and for years he did it successfully. He wasn't invincible, but the system that created him persists. As long as there's demand for drugs in wealthy countries and poverty in supplier countries, there will be Pablo Escobars. The war on drugs didn't stop with Pablo. It continues. The violence continues. Mexico's cartels are more powerful now than Pablo's Medellín Cartel ever was. They control entire regions, kill with impunity. The tactics Pablo pioneered, the sicarios on motorcycles, the targeted assassinations, the corruption, all of it is still standard. Pablo wasn't unique. He was just the most famous, the most excessive, the one who flew too close to the sun. What's disturbing isn't that Pablo existed. It's how he succeeded for so long, how he corrupted an entire system, how he made himself so powerful that the Colombian government had to negotiate with him, how he built genuine popularity among the poor while simultaneously slaughtering thousands. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a phenomenon, a product of inequality, corruption, and the insatiable appetite for cocaine in the United States. Pablo Escobar died on that rooftop in 1993, but the empire he helped build didn't die. The roots still exist. The labs still operate. The violence continues. Different names, different cartels, same business model. Pablo proved it worked, proved that you could make billions in cocaine and fight governments to a standstill. Other criminals learned from him, copied his methods, and the cycle continues. He was a monster, made no mistake about that. He killed thousands of innocent people, terrorized a nation, destroyed countless lives through the drugs he sold. But he was also a genius at understanding power, at building loyalty, at manipulating systems, at scaling violence to achieve goals. He turned cocaine trafficking into an industry, made himself a legend, and even in death his shadow hangs over Colombia. Pablo Escobar, the narco king, the man who made $70 million per day and spent it on hippos and wars, the man who built houses for the poor and bombed planes full of civilians, the man who was elected to Congress and declared war on his own government, the criminal who became more powerful than the state meant to stop him. He's been dead for over 30 years, but his story is still told, still studied, still mythologized. Because Pablo represents something that terrifies governments and fascinates everyone else. The possibility that crime can win, that with enough money, enough violence, enough corruption, you can beat the system. Pablo did it. For years, he lived like a king, died like a rat on a rooftop. But for a time, he was untouchable. And that's what people remember. Not the victims, not the destruction. The fact that a poor kid from Colombia built an empire on cocaine and made the world pay attention. That's Pablo's legacy, not the houses he built, not the soccer fields. The proof that crime, if organized well enough and funded sufficiently, can challenge nations, can create parallel power structures, can make governments negotiate. That's what he proved. And that's why his story matters. Not because he was good, but because he showed exactly how dangerous organized crime can become when it has unlimited resources and zero conscience. Pablo Escobar, dead 30 years, still more famous than most living people. Still the template for narco power. Still the name everyone knows when drug lords are discussed. The king of cocaine. The man who made billions in blood. The legend who died on a rooftop, but whose story will never die. Because people are endlessly fascinated by those who break every rule and succeed anyway. Even if that success is temporary, even if the ending is violent, the story of the rise is always more compelling than the story of the fall. And Pablo rose higher than almost anyone, farther than seemed possible, from stealing tombstones to making billions, from nobody to seventh richest person on earth, from criminal to congressman to fugitive to corpse. The complete arc, the rise and fall, the excess and the end. That's Pablo Escobar. The narco king who proved crime could make you a god, until it killed you. That's the lesson. That's the warning. And 30 years later, criminals are still not listening. Still trying to be the next Pablo, still building empires on the same foundation of cocaine and violence. Still learning the wrong lessons from a man who died running across rooftops. Still believing they'll be different. They won't be. Pablo wasn't special because he succeeded. He was special because his story ended the way all these stories end. In blood, on a rooftop, with nothing but a legend left behind.